So you are able to see the slides, right?
Yes, sir.
So anyway, so last class, okay, we have started our beams, we have closed the compression members. So of course, these are all the names I told you, okay, all of them come to beams, but only difference is the girders, okay. So this is also beam, but we do it in a slightly different fashion. We will cover after our beams, okay. So I have already told you know what kind of things you can use. So there are some guidelines are there, like you say, what section you want to use, say. So depending on the span and depending on the application, you know, you can decide whether you will go for angle section or rolled eye section, blade girders, box girders. So there are some design guidelines are already available, okay. So this is what I showed you also. And the most important thing in our beam design, say the first thing, because I already told you, like you know, the complexity of design is becoming, you know, is increasing, okay. Like tension member we had only area, compression member means radius of gyration, moment of inertia, that also came into picture. Now when it comes to beams, say, so you should have the section modulus also, and because here we are going for, you know, the limit state design and other things, so we require this elastic section modulus, plastic section modulus, and then there is a what we call as a shape factor, which anyway is a ratio between these two also. So this shape factor will tell you, you see, how much reserve strength, extra strength, you see, your member has. So all these becomes the design variables, okay. So you know, so one should know these things also. So I already showed you last class how to find out elastic section modulus, which anyway all of you are familiar from your mechanics of materials. And then the plastic section modulus also. Once the section is completely plastified, say, so then it is section modulus is very easy, you know, you can easily find out. So because everything becomes like a rectangle kind of thing, so compression tension will be same. So equal area axis or plastic axis also we call them. So you can find out the movement, that is a lever arm, you multiply, say, you will get these things itself, okay. So finally I think this was the thing. And the shape factor for rectangular cross section, say, was 1.5. That means rectangular cross sections have 50% more strength. That is how it has to be interpreted, okay. So then we have also told you can easily find out the length of the, you know, the how much is the yield zone also, you can easily find out just some algebra only, okay. You take the bending equal triangles, or you can find out, you see, the how much that is approximately L by 3, like that it comes, you know. So these things also you can estimate. Now if you are having a T section, if you are having a channel section, say, here also is very straightforward. So you have to find out the plastic axis, okay. So that you can find out by equating the area, that is the total area you can easily find out. So that it has to be equally distributed. So A by 2 compression, A by 2 tension. So based on this phenomenon, so you can find out the plastic axis, and then you find out the C1, C2, C1, whatever is there, and then you multiply by their lever arm, say. Or you can just y1 bar, y2 bar, distance of that from the the plastic axis, you will get this the plastic movement from this expressions. And ratio of plastic movement to elastic section will give you the shape factor. Now similarly for I section also, it's all straightforward. Only thing is you have to split the problem into four, like you say, flange separate, the web separate in compression, you see. So these is how you have to calculate these numbers. And you can calculate on both the major axis and minor axis. And I showed you for most of the I sections, say, the section modulus lies approximately, say, 1.1 to 1.13, 1.14, somewhere around, you see, 1.2, around these numbers, these numbers will be located, okay. Now if you have channel sections, say, you can calculate, but they're already people have given in any textbooks, say, like Duggal's book, if you see in the appendix, okay, last this one, they report all these numbers, the plastic modulus and then the shape factors, everything will be reported there. You can also calculate, okay, from the these formulas itself. So that you can even compare these two also, okay. But these things are already reported in the the any textbooks appendix, if you see, say. So these are already provided, okay. Now once this plastic, this becomes very important. After that, the section classification also matters, say, a lot for beams, okay. So the section classification we have already done for the compression members. Now for bending also becomes very crucial and very important, because the bending capacity say is decided by this section classification. All of you know the section classification, right? Class A, class B, class C, class D we have defined. So what do you mean by the the plastic section? No. You remember the plastic things. When I say plastic section, what does it mean? We discussed in the starting the slides. Okay, so what do you mean by plastic section? Or compact section, say semi-compact, say then slender. No. So what does it mean? Now, what do you mean by plastic section? If I say that the section is a plastic, so what does it means? See the figure here. So you have a movement versus rotation. What is happening to the plastic section?
Moment is constant.
So it reaches your MP, that is the plastic thing, it remains, and then it can hold for some amount of time itself. So this we call as, you see, the plastic actual. Then compact section, say that means it goes up to this one, but it will not have a rotational capacity, and then it just the collapses. Now semi-compact is there, say, so the whole thing will not the whole section will not be plastified after reaching some fibers in plastification. So immediately, because of the buckling happens or whatever, so it just collapses here. Okay, so this we call as semi-compact. Then slender section. So slender means it will not even reach the this MY itself, so it just collapses like this. So same thing which we have done for the compression member or whatever the starting we have discussed. So same concept can be used here. And now here the most important thing is your bending capacities. It depends on your type of the sections. Very, very important. Suppose if it's a plastic section, say, so the bending capacity will be simply plastic modulus into F of Y. Suppose if it is a compact, say, still it is ZP into F of Y, because the compact also reaches this MP. So that, but if it is a semi-compact, say, where it lies between ME, approximately MY, it has come like that. So the design capacity, you have to use, you see, this elastic section modulus, not the plastic section modulus. And if it is slender thing, say, of course we don't use the slender thing, so then your F will not be equal to Fy. So you have to use some factor you have to decrease your F. Or you remember, right, last time you remember when you're having angle section, say, suppose if it is a slender section and still I want to use in my construction, so what is that I have to do? So how do I make a slender section into semi-compact?
Add plates on the legs.
To add plates on the legs, that is one way. Other way is
reduce the effective area.
Reduce the effective area. So now we delete this area in our calculations. Okay, so that its capacity will be decreased. So this also we can use. So sometimes we write this as ZE, that is effective thing multiplied by F of Y also. That also we can write. So that means you are decreasing the area itself. So the limits, say, so we have already shown you the compact, semi-compact, slender, say. We have already, that table is given in the IS code. So if I have I section, say, so these are the limits: 9.4 times epsilon, 10.5 times epsilon, 15.7 for welded sections, say. So these are the limits actual. So before you do the beams, so you have to classify. One is a shape factor, plastic modulus, that is one calculation. Next step is you have to classify your section. So if you are in the plastic sense, say, so you should use ZP. If it is a compact, so you should use ZP. If it is semi-compact, so you should not use ZP, you should use ZD. So your whole capacity, the whole design, the bending capacity changes just based on the section classification. So this is a very, very important step in the design of beams. So the first step is calculation of plastic modulus, shape factor. But fortunately, the plastic modulus, shape factors are already given in the that backside of textbooks. They are available. If they are not, also you can calculate by using your the area, centroid, and other kind of concepts. Now after you calculate all those things, then the bending capacity, say, the first step is you classify the section. So which one you should use, whether I should use the plastic modulus or whether I should use a section modulus, that is the next step actually. So that depends on your type of the sections. Okay, so you should classify whatever ISMB 300, whatever you are using, and then based on that, say, you have to decide which one goes into your calculations, ZP or ZD or effective the section modulus. So this is the next step. Now coming to the modes of failure, say how many modes your beams can fail, say. So it is very straightforward. Okay, so there are three modes of failure are there. Okay, so of course there are many are there, but most of them can be classified into three things. One is the bending triggering collapse, okay, which is a straightforward. Generally, how do the beams fail? No. How do the beam fail? See, like for example, if I have a I already showed this one. So simply supported beam, say how it fails. So what is its failure mode? How it is going to fail?
Plastic hinge.
Plastic hinge. That means why plastic hinge is getting formed because of no. No, so now you have a shear force diagram, you have a bending moment diagram. Which is the most governing thing in beam?
Bending moment.
Bending moment only. Okay, so the bending moment is the thing. So that is a classical, the failure of all the beams. So that is, the beam, the bending failure we say. Now another type of failure which is, happens in beams is this lateral torsional buckling. Okay, so this we will come to after, some point of time. So this is one, the thing. Now after this, we have this what we call as, the local failures also. Okay, so that is, the local failure also. So these are basically, you see, three types of modes of failure which are there for the beams. We will discuss this in step by step. Okay, so the same thing I'm showing. So this is a classical collapse. Okay, where the beam bends, and finally you see the plastic hinge you see gets formed here. Okay, so then automatically the bending failure comes. Then we have this lateral torsional buckling also. I will show you the things after some point of time. Then these things we call them as the local failures. Okay, so the local failures so this happens like you see the flange buckles, or the small the web buckles, or maybe you see the crushing of the web buckling or web crushing, say. So these are all the local failures we say. So three basic fundamental modes. One is bending. Okay, then this is a lateral torsional buckling, that is LTB. So this is one type of failure. And then the local failures, like you see the flange buckles or web goes away, or wherever you see the load is acting, say. So there you may have some kind of a problem. You see the shear yielding comes here, then web crushing this happens. So like that you see. So we will have these type of failures also. Okay. So these are the basic failure modes. Now let us see this in great detail. Now here one most important thing all of you should understand. See, in the design of the beams, we have a shear force diagram and we have bending moment diagram. So which is more important for us among these two? Which is the most important?
Bending moment diagram.
So this is the one widely we use. Of course, your simple bending formula also, pure bending and other things comes. Now, this shear force, say, whether it influences your bending also. See, bending moment, all of them are linked. So generally we neglect this shear force. So the bending capacity of the beam basically. Okay, so if I see the bending capacity of the beam, it is completely dominated by the the bending moment only. Okay, but sometimes what happens is, if the shear force say, it also influences the bending the capacity of the beam, provided you see there is one thumb rule is there, like you see when it exceeds 0.5 times the capacity of the this one, say. So then what happens is your bending capacity, like you see, if the shear force in the beam, say, is less than 0.5 times the applied whatever this one, so bending capacity doesn't get changed, it remains almost constant. But if the shear force, say, if the shear automatically, if the bending capacity is 0.5 times BP or something, so the bending capacity of the beam automatically you see it decreases actually. So this we call this as you say high shear. Okay, and this we call as you see the low shear kind of thing. And this number 0.5, of course the code takes the 0.6 or something like that. So this comes from the von Mises criteria. Now for von Mises, this one's for pure shear. What is the it comes? You remember, right? In the shear failure, in the bolts, we have seen if it is shear, say, what happens in the von Mises criteria?
1/√3.
Fy, suppose if it is a yield strength in tension, so Fy by root 3 comes into picture. What is 1 by root 3? So this, if you calculate on your computer, so this number turns out to be 0.58 times f of y actual. Okay, so approximately if you round it off, say 0.6 times, you see, f of y. So where Fy is your the yield strength of the material. So generally for the shear also, say, so shear is also this root 3 business comes. So generally, in our calculations, if the shear force, okay, or the shear capacity, say, if it is the 0.6, once it has exceeded this this range, say, so then we call it as a high shear. And if it is a low shear, so here the bending capacity has to be reduced actually, because it's automatically reduced. So shear force also, it governs the bending capacity, depends on this shear also. So this is a 0.6, say, so this is a number which we use in the code itself. So this number comes from 1 meter stress only, and 0.58 comes, but approximately 0.6 times Fy or something, you say, we take it in our design. So this is what they say. So the design shear resistance is say. So this is the most important thing. Okay. So the first thing in design, say, what you have to do is, after you have classified the section, whether shear influences the bending capacity or not. So this you have to find out. Okay. The bending capacity of the beam. Now, so this you have to verify. Okay. So this has to be verified, the first step actually. So the rule is very simple. So Ay into tau y, and tau y is anyway, you say, root 3 kind of thing. So, and of course, generally, in our if it is I section, say, now if it, so if your beam is made up of I sections, which one will carry shear? So generally shear is carried by flanges or the web for an I beam.
Web.
So web actual. Okay, so you can calculate the area. It's like for hot rolled sections, H times TW, welded sections, D times TW. So you can calculate these areas. So H is overall depth of the section. You can find out clear depth of the web between the flanges. So these you can find out the web area or whatever here. Okay, based on these expressions, and then you can calculate the shear capacity of your section. So this is my the design shear capacity of my section itself. So if the shear force, whatever is coming on the beam, say, the shear force. Okay, so this is a 0.6 times if you take, say, so then we call it as a high shear, or we call it as a low shear. So the starting point is you have to calculate your shear force or the shear capacity of my structure itself. Okay, so once it is done, say, so this V, if it is less than 0.6 times Vd, so Vd is the design strength. Okay, so the design shear capacity, that is which you have calculated from the previous formula. Okay, now V is the shear force which is coming on the beam. Okay, so if the applied shear forces are the shear force in the beam, if it is less than 0.6 times Vd, the Vd is anyway the design shear capacity which you have estimated from this expression. So we call this as, you see, the low shear. You followed. So we call this as a low shear. So your shear force, say, doesn't influence bending capacity. So and bending capacity, you see, there is no influence of the shear force on the bending capacity of the beam. So this expression we try to use for finding the bending capacity. Okay, so Zp is anyway the plastic section modulus. Fy, this comes from your simple bending formula, and beta p is a factor actual. Okay, so which you have to take if it is 1 for plastic and compact sections, and for semi-compact, say, because already we told, right, you will not be using the plastic, this one, you have to use Ze by Zp, that is your shape factor or whatever, say, you have to use in your calculations. And these are the plastic section modulus, and Fy is the yield stress of the material. Then this is, your partial safety factor is there, and of course you have to verify for 1.2 times and then 1.5 times for the cantilever beam. So these numbers, say, so these two criteria, so this is a serviceability criteria. You followed. So now, because we are using the plastic section modulus in our design calculations, we already told you, right? What is the problem you have? So we are using the plastic or whatever we have gone. So what happens? Although the beam has more strength, say, but what happens to the deflection? So this what happens in this range actually. So the your beam may be set, but the deflection will be so high it may not satisfy the serviceability criteria. Say. So for this they put a limit like you see 1.2 to 1.5, and this 1.2 also why it is 1.2. The reason is also like this. What is the shape factor for I sections? The shape factors. If you see the I sections, more or less they are all located under. Now what is the value? Can you see? Of course, I'm showing only for MB. You have WB, wide flange, you have all kinds of beams. Say. So mostly the shape factors are around 1.2. So that's why this 1.2 comes into this calculations. Okay, so that is how it comes. And of course, if it is a cantilever beam, say, so then our requirement is so this turns out to be 1.5 itself. So that is how you see the design shear, the bending capacity of the beam can be estimated from this simple formula, provided your applied shear force, okay, it is less than 0.6 times VD, that is a design shear capacity of your beam. So this is 0.6, how it comes? So this 0.6 comes from where? Just now I explained it. 0.6 represents
1/√3.
1/√3. So that is how it comes. So this is a low shear. And now sometimes in the in the beams say, so what happens is you may be having holes will be there in the tension zone. You followed? So when you are having a flanges, so when you have the flanges, so now here the assumption is like this. So in the I section, say, now web carries now. So you have a shear force and bending moment. So the web carries shear force. Web is responsible for shear, and the bending moments is resisted by the flanges. So they are the ones which resist the bending moment. Web, it comes for the shear. Now suppose if I have any holes, say, in the flange, because we try to connect it to some other section or whatever. So the code says you can neglect the these holes or whatever, you can do the calculations, but they also give some types of a thing like you see. So this is a criteria. So your net area, gross area of the flange, say, so you find out the net area, that means removing the hole diameter and other things, and the gross area of the flange basically. So if this ratio, say, if it is greater than Fy by Fu, gamma M1 by gamma M0, these are all the safety factors, and this is a 0.9. This 0.9 comes for where? Now you remember this 0.9, why it comes? When there are holes. You remember 0.9 times Fu. Where did you see this 0.9? Now, so this 0.9 comes where this number comes. This is 0.9. Now you have seen this 0.9 formula, this number 0.9, it came from where, which design? Tension member, compression members, or where did you see this 0.9?
Tension member.
Now where for tension members, where you have seen to calculate which area? Net rupture, you remember the net rupture area or something, where, and then we had a gross area also. So this 0.9 comes when there are holes basically. So this is like a tension member only. So so this 0.9 comes. So if it is greater than this one, so you can ignore the, if there are holes also, your bending capacity will not be reduced actually. Okay, but if there are holes, if this criteria doesn't get satisfied, say, so then you may have to decrease the your the area of the flange, or maybe you see effective flange, or your section modulus or something. You have to do some corrections. But generally this criteria will be always be met in practice. But this is only just a check actually. Okay. Then we have this is the shear lag also. Of course the code doesn't say anything, but there is what we call as the shear lag also. So generally this is shear lag, you remember, right? Previously also we have said this shear lag also came where? In compression you studied, or in the tension members?
Tension members.
No, so the tension members you would have studied. So the shear lag also, what happens when there is a flange, say, see, generally the assumption is that the bending stress is uniform. Okay, so something like this you see we have, but what happens is in the flange, say, the stress which has to be uniform basically. Okay, it should be like this. So everywhere the stress should be same. like this it happens. But what happens is, the stress will not be uniform. So you will see these type of stresses. Okay, so here the stresses will be small. Here at the middle the stress will be high, but at the edges, the stress that goes away. So that it is, so here the stresses are at a lag compared to this portion. So this they call as the shear lag effects in the flange also. So here they say that you can ignore this. So these are the guidelines. If B naught is less than L naught by 20, or B naught is less than L naught by 10, where L naught is the length between the points of inflection in the span, then B naught is the width of the flange with outstanding, then internal element. So you have to do this check also. Generally, this also is not a big issue in our design, but this is just a check actual. Okay. So for the shear lag, suppose if these limits are not, this one say, so then you have to do some other extra things, or maybe some other you have to say, they say that you can reduce the effective the width of the flange. Okay, so effective width, like you are reducing the area, or the capacity has to be reduced. So this is also another case which you may have to do in the beams. Okay, for the design. So the bending capacity is this expression only. Okay, so that is beta Zp into Fy by gamma times m naught. But this has to be reduced if you have two issues. One is the holes in the tension zone. Other one is this shear lag. But in most of the cases, you will not see these two issues actually. Okay, most of the cases, shear lag, holes will not be there, or hole if it is there also, this criteria will be automatically met. But maybe in some cases, special cases, these two criteria are not meeting, say, then this capacity has to be reduced once again. So this is for the low shear. Now if it is for high shear, say, okay, so what is meant by high shear? So low shear means, this is a criteria. We should be less than the shear force should be less than 0.6 times the design shear capacity. So this is our low shear. Okay, high shear means the applied shear force, so this is if it doesn't satisfy this criteria, say, if it is more than V is less than it is more than 0.6 times VD, so then this we call as the high shear cases. So now your bending strength has to be reduced still further, because your shear also is coming into picture actually. So your shear also influences your bending capacity of this one. So this is the expression which our code gives. Okay, so this is the expression here. So this is our design bending capacity, that is that same whatever expression we used here, beta B into Zp into F of Y by gamma times m naught. Now it has to be reduced. So minus beta md minus some mjd. So these are all empirical the formulas. All of them have been borrowed from the Eurocode or something, but slightly modified from the Eurocode. So MD is a plastic design movement, which is the previous case you have taken. So this MJD say, so this is an expression. So ZP minus for I sections, channel sections say. So TW is the thickness of the web, H is the depth of the web, and Fy gamma m naught you substitute, you will get MJD, then beta. So this is a reduction factor we say. So 2 times Vu by Vd. Vu is the shear force. That is a factored shear force. Okay, so factored shear force we have. Then Vd anyway is a design capacity. Okay, so you have to use these two, and then you substitute in this expression. So your bending capacity of the beam, say, automatically it gets reduced. So this expression you can use for plastic and compact sections. Suppose if it is a semi-compact section, say, so the code specifies you can just use Ze into Fy by gamma times m naught. So this you under slender sections, say, still you have to reduce actual. Okay, so beta times ZPV by 1.5 itself also comes into picture. Okay, so these are the expressions. So now the bending capacity of your beam, say, so there are two conditions. One is for high shear, then low shear. So low shear is very easy, but when it is a high shear, say, the bending capacity gets automatically decreased, because shear also tries to comes into picture, and it will affect your bending capacity of the beam itself. Okay, so this is a issue. So these are the two things. And now, so this is the one how you have to handle the bending failure in the beam itself. Now we will see the second mode of failure, which is the most complicated. That is this lateral torsional buckling. Okay. Now before going, I will ask you, see whether the beams can buckle. So you would have studied in mechanics, columns only will buckle. Whether beam can buckle? Can a beam buckle?
Yes, sir.
Why?
There is compression force on the flanges which can have local buckle.
So because when a beam, all of you know, right, the top thing will be in compression, bottom will be in tension. So it is so generally buckling is not associated with columns. Okay, anything in compression can buckle. Even arch you have seen it. Arch also, what type of forces will be there in arch? No, in arch SSA. You would have studied, right, in structure analysis. It will be
Pure compression.
Pure compress. So arch also can buckle actual. So anything in compression can buckle. It is not essentially a column. So beam can buckle wherever you have a compression, say automatically it can buckle itself. But in beams it is little bit complicated. In the columns it was very easy. So it was just the buckling like this, similar to your bending kind of thing. But in beams, the problem what happens is the top fiber will be in compression, the bottom one will be in the tension. So what happens when it tries to buckle, say, so the top fibers wants to buckle because this is in compression, but the bottom one is in tension. So tension members, whether they buckle?
No, sir.
So tension doesn't buckle, compression. So this tries to buckle, but the bottom one doesn't want to buckle. So it holds actually. This buckling, it is not like a uniform. So in the column, it was like a uniform you had like this. But in beams, what happens is the top one wants to compress, the bottom one doesn't want to buckle. It holds this one. So here what happens is, you will see this type of torsion also comes into picture actually. Because of this, tension doesn't want to buckle, so unsymmetric kind of a thing. So and then it buckles in a lateral direction. So that's why we call this as the lateral torsional buckling. You followed LTB. So this is a very, very, the most critical thing for the beams actually. And any beams, although there is no eccentricity, like you say, the load is symmetric, everything is perfect, all are fine, but still there is a chance of buckling here. You can see here, this is a channel section, say. Now, why this things buckles? Why this has buckled here? Oh, sorry, this is an I section. So you can see here, it has buckled in other direction itself. So any cross section, say, even it may be a circular cross section or channels or whatever, say, if the load is acting at shear center or wherever it is acting, there is always a chance of this, the buckling in the lateral torsion buckling. I will just show you one simple video. So you can just see this is available in the YouTube. Okay. So this is a lateral torsional buckling test, somebody has carried out, and this is an I-beam. And you are having, they have applied a concentrated load at the center. So just to see, and he has plotted two graphs. One is a force versus vertical displacement, then force versus horizontal displacement. So horizontal displacement is this lateral thing itself. So both the things you can just see from this video. So you can see the load is keep on increasing. See the point here. So there is how this force versus horizontal displacement, force versus vertical. So in the starting, vertical is more. Okay, so the beam is bending in the starting. Now you see after some point of a time how the beam bends. So your lateral torsion buckling has not started. So you can see here it has not yet started. The horizontal displacement is slight zero only, slightly it is starting, but vertical displacement you are having, that is a bending. So as you keep on increasing the load, say, now you can see. Now the beam is going in which direction? Vertical or horizontal?
Horizontal.
So see here, the horizontal displacement is increasing like anything, the lateral displacement. So you can see the mode shape also, how the beam is buckling here. So you can see here. So now you see it has almost, it has buckled lateral direction. So you can see this lateral torsional buckling, you see, from this for an IB. See, this is a mode shape actually, how the beam buckles in a lateral torsional buckling. Followed. So generally, you know, when you apply the load, say the beam should bend, but you know, it may happen in other way around also, like our columns. Okay. So this is a very important, you know, nice video which you can easily, you know, understand. You see, this lateral torsional buckling also. Okay. So I will send you the link also. You can watch whenever, you know, to understand why the beam, you know, now it is unloading. He has unloaded this one. So you can see it doesn't go to the original position. So some plastic thing will be there also. So he has shown both loading and unloading in this video. Okay. So let us go back to our this one. So that is how the lateral torsional buckling, it happens basically. Okay, because you know the top one compression, bottom one tension. The top one tries to buckle, the bottom one doesn't want to buckle. So your torsion also comes into picture. So it is a mix of you know, the bending, then torsion. And now in torsion, say what is another most important thing? So when you are having you know, these type of shapes, I sections and these type of shapes, what is the most important thing? And suppose you know, in your mechanics you would have studied torsion of circular cross sections. Now suppose for non-circular cross sections, what is a very important thing? What is another extra thing which comes into picture? Now, what extra thing you have to do for non-circular cross sections? So in your mechanics material, you would have studied a circular section subjected to torque. So there the assumption was when you apply torque, say, so only thing what happens is your cross section rotates actually. Some theta, something like that you do, and you derive that torsion formula. Suppose if it is a rectangular cross section, say, and you apply torque, what happens? What happens apart from rotations? What happens for rectangular cross section or non-circular cross sections? Now, what is that extra thing you have to do? Now, any of you remember? Now, what is that extra thing you have to do? Non-circular cross section. So what is the problem? What happens? Apart from rotation, so what type of deformation you will see? Torsion is also shear only generally. Okay, the shear deformation or whatever you try to do. But apart from that, you will have one more extra thing if it is a non-circular cross section. What do you call this one? Have you heard this word? What is this thing?
Plane sections become unplane.
Warping. So what is meant by warping? So what happens if you have a, you know, the rectangular section, say, and if it is subjected to torque, now what happens? Its shape will be, you know, you followed something like this. You see, it happens actually. It will be no more rectangular. So warping also comes into picture. And unfortunately, in the steel tables, whatever cross sections we have, I section, all of them, you know, they are all non-circular, angles, Gingles and others. So when you're having these steel tables, steel things, so warping also has to be considered into our calculations. Okay, it's also a very, very important thing in torsion. And mechanics of material, you will not study warping. You will study only, you know, the shear and ordinary, you know, the simple torsion formula. But you have to add warping also into our calculation. The warping rigidity, shear rigidity, torsional rigidity, all those things comes into picture. Okay, so this is what it happens. So if you have an I section subjected to a concentrated load, so in lateral torsional buckling, says, just now I showed you the video. So before buckling, you had a horizontal, a vertical movement. But after when the load is increased, you will see this lateral torsional buckling. You will see that video, right? The same thing only. So the load is here, so you will be having twisting, and you also will have, you see, this horizontal movement also. So this is a lateral movement, okay, and this is a twisting. So that's why we use a lateral torsional buckling. Now suppose that the whole beam is under compression, say from top to bottom. Right now we are having like this. Okay, but if the whole beam is under compression, say, then what happens? What type of buckling mode it will be having? See the whole beam, it will be
normal buckling, either local or global.
so there will be no twisting actually. You followed it. So this will not be there, no twisting. But because of this, tension compression things, so you are also having twisting also, which comes into picture. That's why lateral torsional buckling, you see the word comes into picture. Lateral means horizontal, torsion means because of compression tension, you have a twisting also. Okay. So this lateral torsional buckling set, so it is a very complex and a huge problem in our design. So it depends on so many issues. One is the boundary conditions, like the edges of the beam. Suppose if it is simply supported set, then you will have something. Then if it is fixed or whatever say, so then this also becomes very important. Then another most important thing is the type and position of the load here. Okay, this is a very important thing in lateral torsional buckling. See, like for example, say, so this is an I section. See, I can apply the load on the top flange actually. Okay, or we can apply the load at the center, that is at the centroid of the I section, or I can apply the load at the bottom also. You followed. So the load is applied at the bottom. And now what is the difference between, you tell me the difference between the first one and the second one, say, what is that it tells you? Are they same or are they different for lateral torsional buckling? See, this is a beam's resisting force. So this will be obviously acting at its centroid. So the load is downward, say, so the resistance will be upside. Now here we have the beam resistance here. Now you tell me when the load is acting at the top flange or at the bottom flange, say, what's the difference between this and this? Now, which will buckle faster, which is more dangerous, say? Top flange or bottom flange?
Bottom flange.
No, bottom flange is more dangerous, say?
Yes, sir. There is a that will indicate. No, okay, top flange.
Top or bottom?
Top flange.
So be careful. So in the top flange, what is happening? The load is like this, and this is laterally buckling in this direction only. Okay. So now what happens? This one and this one, say. So automatically, you have a lever arm here also. So what happens is, there is a chance that this will buckle fast actually. Okay. So whereas here, say, so the bottom flange, this one. So what happens? So this is trying to bend like this. But here, this is trying to bend, in this direction itself. Okay, so you will have a movement, you see the, this direction also. So this is what we call as stabilized condition also. Okay, stabilizing effect also, people call. Whereas this case we call as destabilizing you see the effect itself. And of course this is anyway, it doesn't make any difference, both of them are same. So there is no, the movement, nothing comes into picture because lever arm they are acting at the same point. But this is what we call as a stabilizing this one. So if you know that your beam is subjected to lateral torsional bucklings and you have been given a chance, you can apply load at the top or at the bottom flanges. Which one you will choose? Which is more easy, or which is more this one in design?
Bottom flange.
Yeah, so that is gives you the stabilized this effect itself. But can you apply? See, sometimes you cannot apply at the bottom flange, or you may have to apply load at the top itself. So the lateral torsional buckling, it depends on, you see, the type and position of the load also. So where it is acting also becomes very important. So this is just the illustration here, like pi square EI by GY. EI is your flexural rigidity. This is a torsional rigidity. So if you take the ratio, if you try to plot, say, so this is the destabilizing effect actually. So the bending moment required, say, so here the bending moment required to cause a lateral torsional buckling. So if I calculate, so the bending moment required to lateral torsional buckling, then bending moment required for lateral torsional buckling in this case and this case, which one will be higher? No, this is the top flange, this is bottom flange. Which one will be higher? The bending moment required for lateral torsion buckling for the top flange, or which one will be higher, the first or second case? See, because here you are getting additional resistance also. Let us say This case, you know, the beam lateral torsional buckling happens for 100, say. Now what happens for this case? How much movement is required? It will be more than 100 or less than 100? No. So in this case, what happens? Just now you told it is a stabilizing kind of thing. So you know the load can, which how much bending moment should be higher or smaller than this one, top or bottom?
It will be lower than this. I mean,
So this is a thing. This is what you are, and so I want to make it lateral torsion buckling should happen for this case. Okay, so the bending moment required to lateral torsion buckling for this case will be higher than this case actually. Okay, so because since you have applied the load, you are having an additional advantage. The small, of course, the lever arm will be very followed, right? Small extra resistance is coming into picture, so this will be higher basically, the capacity or whatever. Okay, that is anyway this figure, you know. So if it is a bottom flange, this one say, so its a capacity will be high. Suppose if I take K as a 10 say. So this is how it happens. So like you see, this one, the top flange is a 0.65 or something say. So this will be, you know, 1.5 or something, you know, we have this issue. So it will be very high. So this is what we call as a stabilizing effect. This is a destabilizing effect actual. Okay. So in practical situations, you know, if there is, if you have been given an option, say this or this, you know, this you can select such that its capacity becomes increased actually. Okay, so this is the most important thing. Now another thing, the shape of the cross section also, this also is a very important thing. Suppose if you have rectangular cross sections or you know, these type of cross sections, say, so its lateral torsional buckling capacity will be very high. The capacity, it means large movements are required to make it lateral torsional buckling. Suppose if you are having an I section or I section with you know, the depth is more. So what happens, you know, the bending capacity, what happens, this MCR, the critical buckling, you know, the bending movement, say, for buckling of this section will be, you know, very small. Say like for example, if I take 30 length to depth, see the bending moment required for lateral torsion buckling for this section, if it is 1 say approximately, now for this section will be, you know, this is the value you followed, but whereas this section, this is the value much you know, the lower. So your shape of the cross section also matters a lot, you know, for this lateral torsional buckling also. So these are the things. So one is a support condition, then we have type and position of the loads, then we have the type of the cross section also, what type of cross section you are having, then of course, you know, the residual stresses and whatever. So because already I told you, right, when you are doing welding or in the factory, say, generally because of non-uniform cooling, there will be some residual stresses. So that also, you know, control this lateral torsion buckling. Then material properties also, then imperfections. So imperfections are very, you know, the dangerous kind of thing. Already the beam is ready for LTB. Say already you are having some type of imperfection, like, you know, the beam is not straight or, you know, some small eccentricity is this in loads, say, then your LTB you followed it, it increases like anything itself. So these are some of the things which control the lateral torsional buckling. And then this loading also is a big deal. The loading actually. So loading anyway, you know, whether it's a UDL or a concentrated load, or finally you can draw the bending moment diagram. So, you know, you can define, you know, like you see, if the psi is this one, so if psi is -1, say, that means you see your beam bending moment is, you know, like this. You know, M here, and if you see here 1 say, so how the bending moment diagram is varying basically. So bending moment is varying linear. Suppose if we take 0, so that means you see the bending moment here it is M and here it is 0. Okay, so if it is varying linearly or if it is uniform, or, you know, how it is varying, say, so that also matters a lot. You know, it controls your LTB capacity of your beam itself. So these are some of the important things which control your lateral torsional buckling itself. So this is one classic failure is there. You can see it, Google it. I think the Mercy, this is a bridge, I think, you know, in some California or somewhere. You can see how it has failed. Now, what is the buckle? What is how did it fail? Now, see, this the bridge was like this. The design was like this, you know, but it has failed in which direction? See how this bridge has failed. Now you have seen that test also, right? It has failed in which mode? This is what type of mode?
Lateral torsion buckling.
So these are how the failures will be. So if you Google, no, if you search, you can find out several. These are classical example given in all the textbooks itself. Okay, so lateral torsional buckling. Now for lateral torsional buckling, say you know, right, how to find out the buckling load pi square EI by L square. This is for the columns. Now here, if I want to find out the bending moment, say the critical bending moment, like PCR. Okay, so how to find out the critical bending moment which causes the lateral LTB in the beam, you can calculate. Okay, so you have to write the equations of motion and then you can do itself, but the only thing is, EI is a flexural rigidity. Okay, then GJ is a torsional rigidity, so you also have to include this warping rigidity also for non-circular cross sections. Okay, so this also comes into picture. So it is a little bit more analytical thing. So we can derive the exact expression also. So based on the strain energy, and then you can derive. This is the critical bending moment actually. Okay, for a I section simply supported. Okay, so simply supported subjected to pure bending. So this is the bending moment which is required to make it lateral torsional buckling here. So you can see here. So the formula, how does it looks like? See, for load it is pi square EI by L square. But now what is happening here? This is a bending moment. Okay, so you have EI, but it is inside the square root. So you have a GJ, that is a torsional rigidity. This is a warping rigidity. So warping is indicated by this symbol. Okay, this type of a symbol. So this is the expression. Suppose if it is a fixed beam, say both the ends are fixed. Okay, so this is a critical bending moment actually. Now you compare this with this. What is that you would identify compared to simply supported and this fixed. What is the bending moment? What is the ratio? So simply supported beam, fixed beam subjected to pure bending, which is higher. Now, which is higher, simply supported or fixed case? If you see these two expressions, first is for simply supported, these were fixed. What is the difference between these two?
Double.
It is a double approximate. Of course, you have 4 here, but this will be very, very small itself. Okay, so if it is a concentrated load, say, okay, so analytically you can find out. So this is the expression. For a concentrated load on I section, you see, so you can calculate from this expression itself. Okay, so I think time is over. I will stop here. See this analytical derivation of this formula, say you can do, but as far as this course is concerned, we will not be discussing how to derive this formula. You will study this in structural stability course. So last semester I have taught that course, so I will share you one video. Derivation of this formula. Okay, so how to derive these formulas, for this beams. I will share you my YouTube video. So whenever you have time, so you just watch it. How this formula comes into picture. Okay, by analytically calculating the strain energies, and you can derive, you see, the yourself. As far as this course is concerned, the derivation is not required. But if some of you are interested, say how did this formula came and other things, you can just see that video itself. Okay. So I will stop here. We will continue in our next class.
Thank you, sir.
So if you have any questions, you can ask.